humans don't matter. We don't matter at all. We're tiny little useless creatures running around thinking we're so important.
Ooh, you said treats? You said treats?
Hey, Blue.
Yeah, I mean, you're not blue, you're tea. High pressure.
Yeah, it's high pressure. Welcome, everyone. I have to apologize in advance. I bought some microphones and completely left them at home. So you'll have microphones from here on out, but for this particular video, we actually don't have microphones. It's good.
Do I have a halo?
No, it looks great. It looks great. Perfect. As a data scientist, I can confirm that the skills you've been developing for machine learning and AI are just some of the most desired skills out there right now for anything related to software, technical development, and any business analyst type stuff. They're all looking for machine learning, AI, data scientists. And that's what you've been working on for the last couple of years. So I did have some questions I wanted to start with, and then we'll jump into some other questions. But because that's your expertise, I wanted to ask you, what is AI to you? What is artificial intelligence to you?
Oh. Well, okay, so artificial intelligence to me is just a buzzword. Realistically, what people think of as artificial intelligence is like what you see in the movies, like Skynet, that sort of stuff. And that doesn't exist, nor will it exist in the near future. That's artificial general intelligence, and we're not remotely close to that. What we have now is a narrow form of artificial intelligence. So we have, speech recognition, or language processing, or image recognition, object detection, things like that. But those are all very specific niche things.
I want to interrupt because
Yes.
I just want to say that I think that's what most people are familiar with. They may not know it's AI, but when Facebook can tell you, oh, that's a human face, and now Facebook's gotten so sophisticated, it can even guess whose face it is, and that's a form of artificial intelligence.
Right, that falls under the umbrella, I suppose, of what some companies call artificial intelligence, yes. But I prefer machine learning or deep learning as the broader field. But it's just semantics, really.
Okay. Was there more you wanted to add to what is AI to you?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm assuming Adam's going to be a huge contributor to the field of AI and data science, because he's spent the last, year and a half?
2 years.
2 years working on some deep learning for
handwritten text recognition. So converting images of handwritten text, whether it be like notes or historical documents or things like that, convert that into searchable, archivable, whatever, manipulatable text like that you can use on the internet, or, for other things.
Yeah, I think that'll be super helpful because, we've done the step of scanning in a lot of important historical documents or even personal documents, but then trying to get those into text is yet another step.
Right.
All right, I want to move on to some other questions. I think you might have a very similar question or answer to the last question. What does data science mean to you?
Data science is a different field than I am involved with. So data science, I would say, is gathering insights, through statistical methods and things like that from large amounts of data. Whereas what I am more involved with is taking certain types of data and training algorithms using that data for specific ends, and not just gleaning insights from the data, which is what I would say is more what data science is.
Well, just to let you know, times have changed. So I was there with the transition into when data science started becoming a professional working term, and I led a data science team. And what you're saying was applicable then. So basically, data science, when I was doing it, was more about taking historical data, using whatever mathematical models to make forecasts based on that historical data. And then the next step, what took us beyond analysts, so analysts could already do that sort of thing, but what took us to the next step was, hey, we've got these mathematical models in place, let's set up a real test to make sure that these forecasts we're giving you are correct. Whereas an analyst would say, just, make this change, and then you'll get this outcome. And then they would run that in a real world experience, but not in a very good testing environment. So they wouldn't have a test group versus a control group. Mm-hmm. And that's where the science came in. We were like, don't take our word for it. Let's actually test this in the real world using a test versus a control. And then we would show them how accurate our forecasts were, so then they could use our forecasts with more confidence. Nowadays, it seems like it's really transitioned towards what you're studying. Every position I look at, because I still keep in touch with what's going on, every position, they want AI, they want machine learning, they want deep learning, they want basically what you're doing for anything that's labeled as a data scientist. And they want everything else. They want the kitchen sink. So
right.
I'm not quite sure why they're looking for so much. I feel like they're looking for unicorns.
Yeah, well, I'm currently actively job searching right now, and yeah, I think that's what I've found as well. Is employers want everything. They want PhDs with 9 years of experience and all of these different attributes for a entry level data science position. So yeah, it's a little ridiculous.
So you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Adam's a unicorn, by the way. Hire him. Okay, so you're unexpectedly scheduled to give a TED Talk next week, let's say.
Oh.
For those of you who don't know, TED Talks are ideas worth sharing. And let's say that specifically you're asked to give a TED Talk on what you think is important, not just to society now, but to people in the future. So you want a TED Talk that's going to sort of stand the test of time. What would you give a TED Talk
on? Oh man, are you kidding? I have no idea. I am.
Hey, I'm gonna throw the gauntlet.
Woefully underqualified for this.
Kevin said the same thing. Do you really want to go with Kevin's answer?
Future generations. I've been listening to a great podcast during my lunches, and it's Dan Carlin's Hardcore History, and he rambles on and on for like 4 hours at a time.
Wow. About
various different subjects, and it's pretty remarkable his capacity for just to speak for 4 hours without any like breaks or any he diverges.
He's got breadth.
He has
and
lots
depth.
of diversions.
He must. 4 hours. You got to have breadth and depth to be able to talk for 4
yeah.
hours.
But I've been listening to the rise of the Persian Achaemenid Empire. It's one of I actually studied history in college, and it's one of the things that I enjoy about history is that it really shows you the cyclical nature of human societies. And so just today he brought up the point about what would it be like for someone living in the early Greek, what we think of as right before the Greek civilizations became sort of they grew into the great power that we think of them as. What would they think of when they come upon these vast cities that are in ruins from thousands of years before them? And these ruins show that these cities were far more advanced than anything that they have in their current history today. We don't have that sort of experience right now because everything to us that we see in the past is just, it seems so far below us. We seem to have this constantly advancing trajectory of history. But in reality, the story of humankind, it's not often always trending upwards. Like just like the stock market crashes that we're experiencing right now with the coronavirus. There are times when society sort of collapses. The thing that I would like future generations to recognize is the importance of humility in thinking about our cultures and societies. We are not necessarily we're not the end all be all that we think of ourselves as. We're just another mammal species that haven't yet had our mass extinction event. But it's likely that that's in the future for us. And that's totally fine. That's just where we are. We're I guess remember our tiny place in the vast universe.
Yeah, that reminds me of a concept that I love. So a lot of people think that Elon Musk wants to get to Mars to treat it like a lifeboat for humanity. And I think there's a subtle distinction. I don't believe he's saying, oh, we're going to destroy the Earth, so we need to make Mars our lifeboat. I think what he's saying is it's irresponsible not to get humans to these other planets at a time when we're capable of it. Certainly, it is possible that humans could go back to the Stone Age. I mean, I think it's unlikely for humans to completely die off of Earth, but to lose all the current technology is possible. There's lots of events like an asteroid or a meteor hitting Earth could cause problems. There's lots of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think Elon Musk is saying, hey, let's get to these other planets while we can, because who knows how long we're going to have the capability. And it's like irresponsible not to. And so it's not like, oh, yeah, we can just trash the Earth because we're going to get to Mars. I don't think he's saying that.
No.
I think he's saying, hey, we got to get everywhere we can because who knows what's going to happen.
Right.
And if technology falters and we have people on Mars that are sustainable, even if the technology on Earth falters, then at least so the link is broken, but at least you've got humans in both places and,
right.
and hopefully self-sustaining.
Right. Although I agree with you, I think that's a noble goal. I don't necessarily share that goal. I don't think that what we as humans have is necessarily a special thing. I mean, a lot of people think of human consciousness as this magical...
We've got a puppy playing with a chew toy here, and it's just too cute to stop him. So we're gonna let that happen. Sorry in advance. This is unprofessional, but we're going with it.
I don't think that human consciousness is as remarkable as we think it is. I think it's really just a symptom of a complex system, which we are. And I think, if we were to die out, it'd be unfortunate for us, but I don't think that would be the signal, the end of consciousness in the universe. Once systems become to a certain degree of complexity, once they achieve a certain degree of complexity, I think consciousness is sort of part of that it just sort of comes with it. So I don't think that, I appreciate him and his goal of trying to save humanity. I don't think that it's worth troubling over in the long run, but everybody's got to have a goal, so I think his is more noble than most. Human consciousness is not necessarily a special thing. It's just a thing. And I think that other species can develop consciousness or will develop consciousness or already have consciousness. I mean, Tatey here, he's obviously conscious to some degree. And, there's lots of examples of other, whales or
Dolphins.
Octopuses or dolphins, or, there's a lot of very intelligent creatures that we don't really think of as on the same level as us, but we don't really know. We have no way of communicating. I don't know.
Well, and certainly the case can be made that if humans were to stop existing, right now we're responsible, and if you disagree, I disagree with you. We are largely responsible for this mass extinction event. There's been, 6 or 7 other mass extinction events, so I'm not saying like humans are evil or anything like that. I'm just pointing out the reality that humans are responsible for mass extinction right now. What I mean by mass extinction event is there are lots of species that are going extinct, and most of those extinctions are due to humans needing to take up habitat, basically. That's one of the main reasons for mass extinction. It's just we just keep creeping our habitat and destroying habitats. Whoops. Oh, yeah. We're gonna stop. We're gonna shut that down. The dog's, what's his name? Tater?
Tatey.
Taty's eating my backpack. From that perspective, if you value other states of consciousness, maybe it's better that humans fall by the wayside unless humans figure out how to help diversity of species again.
Right. I think that sort of goes against our whole notion of humans, though. I mean, to see us as just another species is very difficult for a egocentric human. I don't foresee humanity evolving to a point where we don't destroy other species. From the majority of the population of this planet, we are the parasite. It would be nice to get rid of us.
We're definitely...
We are the coronavirus right now, and it's just an ongoing pandemic for everyone else.
Something you'll see is that this coronavirus is kind of shutting down a lot of the things that drive our profit-driven economy. So we're going to see, I think, lots of struggles with money fairly soon, like in not a very long time. And one of the silver linings to this is the planet's basically healing, right? Because a lot of these things that make money for us are the exact things that are polluting our air, for example. Mm-hmm. And so air pollution levels are plummeting because people are working from home, factories are shutting down. Like all these things that are destroying our air quality are the exact things we're shutting off right now. So I think that's kind of a silver lining to all this.
Yeah.
And I think that to bring it back to your point, if we removed humans, I think diversification of the planet would start happening again. Species would start mutating and diversifying. And this mass extinction event would probably turn around if humans were just plucked out. I will respectfully, and it's not that I disagree with you, I just hope to be right. And I do hope to be right that I think humans will actually hit a point where we can contribute to diversification. DNA now is a puzzle we just solve better and better every day. So we could actually not just recreate existing animals, but we could start creating new ones. And obviously there's some ethical boundaries there that we're probably not going to cross anytime soon. But the idea that we can recreate extinct species is something that's very tangible and real at this point. I mean, the idea was in the movies in the 90s with Jurassic Park, but the technology just keeps getting better exponentially. And so I think we're at that point where it's just an ethics question. It's not a question of can we do it. It's more a question of, well, how can we do it and satisfy people's religious boundaries and ethical boundaries. So I hope to be right that we will not only get to a point where we're sustainable as humans, but we're actually adding back diversity that we've perhaps ruined in the past. Not saying I will be right.
Yeah.
I hope to be right.
There's a reason species go extinct sometimes, oftentimes. Well, pretty much all the time. There's a reason they go extinct. I don't know if I would like to see us bring back extinct species. A lot of times, species that have gone extinct went that way because they were outcompeted. They were, from the just nakedly competitive, brutal evolutionary standpoint, they just weren't as good. They were inferior. That would be more human egocentrism.
Yeah.
We would be able to be playing God on a higher and higher level.
Yeah.
Which I don't know.
And I think the reality of that is we are able to play God at a higher and higher level. We can manipulate DNA in just about any way we want. I think we could create new organisms. I'm not saying we should, but I think the reality is the technology, a lot of people don't understand exponential growth. Exponential growth is ridiculous, and that's how our technology is growing. So things that were science fiction just 20 years ago are like the technology, I think, surpasses science fiction. For example, I didn't know, I guess I'm recording with my phone, but I didn't know when I was a kid that I was going to have access to all the collective knowledge of mankind in my pocket, right? Along with the ability to record you, to have a conversation with someone on the other side of the planet. To me, technology is much more advanced than we dreamt it would be. And so I think that our ability to play God is going to continue to increase. And I think that's just a fact. I'm not saying it should be a fact. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I think it's going to continue happening.
Right. Do you think that the increased technological prowess has improved us at all? Has made us better human beings? Has facilitated our growth?
I think that would
as
be
a species.
I think that would be a dangerous question to answer with a blanket answer. And I think a much more cautious way to answer that question is like, in some ways probably not, and in some ways maybe. For example, are we treating other humans better? Well, I think the fact that everyone has a video camera in their pocket, I think that's helping shed light on some of the stuff that's going on with other humans, right? I mean, this country has, and I'm sure all countries do, has a pretty dark history of treatment of other human beings, especially around race. You know, if you were a Native American, whoa. I mean, the genocide that happened is just crazy, right? I mean, we talk about the Nazis in Germany, but it was like just 100 years before that there was a genocide in this country. So I think a lot of those things, technology is helping us, you know, shed light on things that have happened and make us have discussions where we decide, oh, as people, we're not willing to do genocide anymore. Americans at this point, I think it's safe to say we're not supportive of genocide. I'm sure there's some exceptions, but as a whole, right?
It'd be tough to find supporters of genocide.
Yeah, well, I think there's still racists, right? And that's
well, certainly.
Somewhat,
yeah.
There
is a distinction between racists and genocidal maniacs, though.
Yeah, so I think it's safe to say that Americans have kind of turned their back on genocide, even though that was the founding of this country was based on genocide. I mean, it's just gnarly. And that was only, 230 years ago that we were starting this country, and then, bam, the genocide. I mean, it's pretty gnarly.
But do you think that technology... I agree that we have sort of evolved in our dealings with other human beings, but I don't know that it was... I don't know that...
It's totally technology.
Do you think so?
Yeah, here's why. I think that we could have genocide in the case of Native Americans because we didn't have technology. But even in that case, the European people, like the British, were very opposed to what was happening as they learned about it. They were like, you guys need to stop doing that. And so after the Civil War, they continued, basically annihilating Native Americans, and they were having to do it more and more covertly because a lot of the people in Europe were like, you need to stop, like that has to get shut down. And so I think technology has helped us get instant knowledge into people's hands. So one of the things, like, imagine the genocide that happened in Germany. If people had the ability to show the rest of the world, this is what's happening, right? And so I think more and more we have that ability to show people this is what's happening. When radio was invented, a lot of people thought, oh, that's going to be the end of all this war and stuff, because they thought, oh, everyone will have the ability to communicate what's happening. So it wasn't the end of war, but I do think it was the end of certain things on the scales that they were happening. So I definitely think technology has allowed us to have kind of more global knowledge and get information to each other quicker, so that if something pretty gnarly is happening, there's some ability to communicate that out to the world so that the world can sort of collectively get involved. So yeah, I definitely think technology has helped in some ways like that way.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. Another example is there's a history of black men, young black men, being mistreated, to put it lightly, right? Like, I don't want to get too dark in this video. And I think that's still happening. There's video evidence of that still happening. but I think technology is what's helping us cast a brighter and brighter spotlight on it. And most people who see a video where it's like a unarmed black man who's not really doing much, he's like selling cigarettes, like breaking some law, right? Okay, he sold some cigarettes, you're not supposed to do that, but then being strangled to death, literally, and it's all captured on video. I think that collectively adds up and helps us as a society move beyond that, or figure out, well, what can we do to change this?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that shining a light on ugly behavior helps to keep it in check. I suppose that's sort of the, a little bit that's the origin of this, this religious watcher who's always watching you and whatever you do to try it. It helps to keep people from being terrible to each other. But I think the technology also facilitates us being more evil to each other as well. This exponential technological growth, I don't really know what I'm trying to say here. I don't really have a point.
I think that's a good point, and that's why I answered your question the way I did. I said to give a blanket answer of yes, it's helping, or no, it's not helping, I think would be insufficient. And I think it is a reality that it's going to help us in some ways, and it might be our undoing, ultimately, because it's probably not helping us in other ways. For example, I'm noticing more and more when you go out in public, people are just looking at their screens. And when they're at home, they're looking at one screen, and then looking at another screen, and then looking back at that one screen, and then looking at the other screen. Mm-hmm. What is that doing to our psyches? We're the guinea pig generation. Everyone alive right now is the guinea pigs for what that does to a person's psyche. And it's funny because you could sit in this room alone all day, but have this illusion that you're not alone because you could be talking to people on the phone, you could be watching videos, watching TV. So you have this illusion that you're with people and you're just alone in a room. Yeah. I mean, what's that doing to our psyches?
Yeah. Well, that's a good thing right now. I mean, it makes a quarantine a lot easier to swallow. Yeah. The fact that you can be at home and still feel connected to, your colleagues at work or your friends or things like that.
This dog's cuter than you are.
I know. It's a little monster. Need a toy to give him so he doesn't tear my fingers apart. I'm supposed to do this and look away from him when he's biting me. That's what I learned yesterday. It works. Wow.
Well, I have a super fun question. Do you feel complete on the answer you were just given?
Yes. Yeah.
So this question I love, and mostly it's because I love the concept. Are you familiar with the idea or the theory that it's highly probable that we're living in a simulation? Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, sort of. I'm not deeply familiar with the nuances of it.
Let me just give you the quick 30-second rundown. So you know that we make video games, mm-hmm. and you and I can control those characters. And the video games in the 80s, we thought they were awesome, but man, it just keeps getting more and more sophisticated. And the idea is, eventually we're going to get to a point where these simulations are super complex. And perhaps the characters within those video games are so complex that they have some type of awareness. Mm-hmm. Not that they're in a video game, but just some type of awareness of their surroundings of something. And it seems probable that we're going to get to this point. And the idea is, if we do get to that point, and it seems reasonable, that we're not going to create one world. We're going to create lots, just like video games. How many millions of video games are being played right now? Lots, right? Mm-hmm. And so the theory is, if you've got, all these fake worlds or simulated worlds being created, what's the probability that we're the first creatures to evolve in this world that we're in, and we're the first ones, so we're not in a simulation? And the probability, mathematically, is that that's very low. It's much more likely that we're in one of these simulations. And then the part that I get excited about is, if that's true, let's say that we are in a simulation, how many layers deep are we? And what I mean by that is, simulation within a simulation within a simulation, because these simulations themselves are getting so complex that they build simulations inside themselves. And so it's certainly possible that you're just a character being played by not just one alien, or for lack of a better word, but like layers deep. And so you're being controlled by all these different video game players from different species and different layers of simulations. And like one of the guys controlling you right now is probably in his own simulation, and it keeps going back.
Yeah.
And then I have like however many millions of players and simulated players controlling my movements. I mean, I find that heady stuff and pretty exciting, because probabilistically that's far more likely than just you and I being totally real, and this is the non-simulated universe, and this is the one that's, no, we're the real one.
Well, so I think those two ideas are one and the same, really. The idea of a simulated universe is just a way of thinking about what the actual universe really likely is. You know, and the recursive nature of the players playing different, characters and other things. I mean, if you think about our genes, our DNA, they're the controls that the previous generation are controlling, and then back and back and back generations. The simulations of the universe, it could very well be the sort of the multiverse concept. There's not just we're like Schrodinger's cat. Every time you open the door, there are two universes created. There's one where the cat's alive, one where the cat's dead. Every single branching decision, every single thing creates a new universe. And so these are just, you could think of those as simulations on the universe. So I think it is heady stuff, but I think that's exactly what our current understanding of the universe is.
I didn't follow one part of that. So just for the viewers who don't know the multiverse theory, it's based on quantum mechanics, and it's this idea that every possible event that can happen does happen, and it happens in its own separate universe. So at every moment we're creating all these universes, and I'm not going to use the word infinite because the math doesn't support that. It is a finite number of universes that's being created every moment, but it's a very large number, right? An incredibly large number. So you're getting to this very large number of universes very quickly. So that's the multiverse theory. But something I didn't follow was, you said that DNA is the controller that our ancestors are using to control us. Can you give me a little more insight into what you meant?
And I guess it's not just DNA. Just if you think about, I mean, this gets into the free will and things like that. If you think about all of the different things that go into a certain decision that you make, you can think of all of those different components as being players, as being controllers in this game.
Okay.
And they extend, many levels deep, right? That's all the point that I was getting at, really.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, it's that you, Adam Schiller, you made the decision to take this interview today, but it's possible that you made that decision because of something that happened generations ago, and then it got carried through. That information somehow got carried through generations to this exact moment.
Yes, right. I mean, the kind of person that I am and the decisions that I make are very much a product of, what my parents have taught me, the genes that they've passed down to me, the genes that my grandparents have passed down, and further and further and further. I'm just a product of my society. You could think of my culture as being a controller as well. I mean, I'm not.
And other players.
I'm just a an NPC in your universe, like you are in mine.
Mm-hmm. What's an NPC?
A non-player character.
So a non-player character is computer controlled.
Right. And so that's what we all are, basically. We're all controlled by our software. So who wrote our software? I mean,
yeah.
It came. It's been being written for you know, the entire length of the universe, how far back can you go? Yeah, that's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, this is heady stuff. I didn't
It
know we
is.
were going to go this deep, and I'm really excited it is. It brings me to one of the most fundamental questions you can pose, which is why is there something rather than nothing?
Right.
Like, why does this all exist versus nothing? Because nothing seems far more probable than all of this, which I think is an interesting question with no, I don't think there'll ever be an answer to that question. There's a lot of attempts at answers, but the reason I call them attempts at answers is because there's no way to verify that the answer is correct or incorrect. So it's like we pose this as a possible answer, knowing that we can't really prove or necessarily disprove this.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a I'm sure there's like some Latin term for questions like this. But if there were nothing, then there would be no question. We would not ask the question. There wouldn't be anything to ask.
Well, a lot of people pose, this comes back to something we were getting into earlier just a tiny bit, that you cannot have a universe without consciousness. So when we were kids and we're growing up, we kind of think, oh, all this stuff exists, it existed before I got here, and I'm going to be a part of it now, and then I'm going to wink out of existence. And it's still going to carry on. And when humans are all gone, and when let's say all of Earth's creatures are gone, the rest of the universe is going to continue carrying on. Like, I think that's the picture a lot of us have. And a lot of philosophers and even scientists pose this idea that you actually can't have a universe without an observer. And I think that's a very interesting idea. So if there were no conscious beings anywhere, then like the idea of a universe makes no sense.
I'm not sure I follow that, though, because what about the early days of the universe when it was just elementary particles and
so they would push to say that
saying the elementary
whole
particles
thing couldn't have existed without consciousness. So the moment conscious beings came into existence, then all of that started to exist. And then you start getting into questions of time too, because time we think of as linear, because we're very linear time beings. But fundamental physics, time is not really what's the word? I'm going to get this wrong. But if you look at a lot of the equations that describe physics, time is not like a fundamental concept. And time has no meaning when you stop having changes. So when we get to the inevitable heat death of the universe, and that's where basically everything is, there's just no heat left and there's no anything, then time has no concept because nothing's changing. So there's no way to measure time. And so time just loses all of its concept. And then before the Big Bang, there was no changes as far as we know. So time had no concept then. And so it's just this moment where time has some concept to you and me. But yeah, I think the idea is that the universe tickled into existence in this funky way, and that now that we're able to consciously perceive it, we can create this narrative about how it tickled into existence. But if we never came along, if conscious beings never came along, then that whole concept of it tickling into existence would have been irrelevant. Just
it sounds like the tree falling in the forest.
Yeah, exactly. Without an observer, can something really happen?
Right. I would say that, obviously there's no way to prove it one way or the other, but it seems sort of silly to think that a tree falling in the forest sometimes makes a sound and sometimes doesn't make a sound. Right?
So if I'm hearing you right, you kind of think, like what I think all of us think when we're kids, is basically all this stuff existed. It doesn't matter if humans are a part of it. It doesn't matter if the Earth's a part of it. Like, let's say that the only conscious beings ever in the universe were on Earth, which obviously is like a preposterously low probability of that being the case. But let's just say that's the case for this argument. And you wink the Earth out of existence. I think most of us kind of assume, well, things will just go on as usual within the universe. And there's philosophers that are like, nope, actually you can't have the universe without consciousness. They're a requirement for one another. Or you can't have, maybe not the universe, you can't have a concept of reality or existence without consciousness. Maybe that's a better way to. Maybe that's what they're saying. So maybe I misrepresented.
Yeah, I think they're still completely wrong. I think that's just a very, human-centric point of view, which is, that's pretty normal throughout history, especially, philosophical history. Sort of a selfish viewpoint that the universe cannot exist without great humans to think about it.
I don't like philosophers think that humans.
Well, yeah, I know.
I'm consciousness.
I'm poking fun, but
obviously this dog has consciousness, so it's not a human-centric thing. It's more a consciousness. What do you need for?
But it goes to the magic of consciousness. People think that consciousness is a magical thing.
Yeah.
I don't see that. It doesn't. To me, it's not magical. It's just a thing, And I'm curious though to why we think it's so magical. Is it just because? It's just because we can't imagine that we're not special? Why do we see ourselves as being this species above all of the other species on this planet? That we alone are capable of this, this special type of consciousness.
I don't think that that's representative of what philosophers are saying when they talk about consciousness. I agree with you. Most people think of humans as like a step change above other animals, right? I think most people, there is something special about us. We're able to manipulate our environment in ways significantly more intense than other creatures on the planet. And that's a truth, right? Like that's not I'm not saying that's good or bad, but that is a truth, that we as a species manipulate the world around us in ways that are not observed in the natural world beyond humans.
Well, lots of species manipulate the world.
Totally.
The fact that we just do it on a broad scale, the fact that we have the ability to destroy other species at will, does that put us on a plane, on an elevated plane?
Yeah, I'm not making that claim. What I'm saying is that it is a fact that we manipulate the world in a significantly more intense way than other creatures. I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that's a fact, right? And I think a lot of people do put us on like a different place for that, and certainly elevated in some cases, but I'm not saying I agree with that.
Right. I suppose one would argue that consciousness is one of the primary factors of why humans are where we are.
Okay.
That's what people would attribute our mastery of the planet to our elevated consciousness.
Yeah, and I think these are different concepts. So like we've moved on because the topic where we were talking a moment ago was this concept that reality or things can't really exist in the absence of consciousness. That theory or that idea has nothing to do with human consciousness and just consciousness. And so you have, I don't know if paramecium are considered to have consciousness or not, but even the case can be made that rocks have consciousness to some philosophers. So it doesn't even have to be a living being, right? Like we have a definition of what's living, and so there's some people that say, oh, consciousness is actually built into the matter itself.
So what would your definition of consciousness be?
My definition?
Or at least just a working definition of consciousness, so we can speak about the same thing. So I think you're right. I think we're talking across.
Yeah, I think my definition of consciousness would be some recognition of I exist. And I think that's true of living creatures for the most part. I don't know if trees know that they exist, but I suspect they do.
They're living creatures as well.
Yeah, they're living according to our definition of living, but do trees have consciousness, right? So by my definition, I don't know the answer to that. Does a tree know at some level that it exists? And does a rock know at some level does it exist? Does a star at some level know that it exists? Like all the mass in the solar system, all of it's in the star. I mean, just 99 point whatever % of our mass is in that star. So to think the star doesn't have consciousness, I mean, who knows, right? It's clearly this huge nuclear explosion. Does it have consciousness? I don't know. But I think it's pretty easy to assume, based on my definition, that Tatey has consciousness. I think Tatey's aware that he's alive. I think a tree has some awareness, but I don't know. I can't verify that. So that'd be my definition of consciousness. Some awareness that I exist.
Right. I don't see how the idea of consciousness or an individual with consciousness has any relation whatsoever to the existence of the universe.
Yeah.
I don't see the connection between the two at all.
And like I said when I was posing this, so a book I read, I'm going to be honest, a book I read is called Why Does the World Exist? An existential detective novel. And it's an author going around asking philosophers, psychologists, physicists, just across the board, religious experts, that same exact question. And they all have their answers, but like I said earlier, they're attempts at answers. They're not 100%, they're not verifiable answers. And so this is the type of thing that you get into, especially with the philosophers or some of the religious experts. You get into these more heady ideas of like, well, what is consciousness? And can you have a universe without it? And depending on how you define consciousness, some people think, well, no, you can't really have, like, none of this can exist without the concept of consciousness. But it's not to say, like, oh, the universe wouldn't exist without humans. I don't think anyone's making that claim.
I know. I'm not. That was a joke.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I don't see the connection between the two. I mean, the fundamental particles.
Well, I am happy to share that book with you if you are interested.
Okay, sure.
I'm probably not representing the philosophers very well. I think they could articulate it better than I am. But yeah, there's a lot of things that, what are the core things that the universe needs? And so most people agree on matter, right? There has to be matter. There has to be protons and electrons and the things that make up this. Like, that's necessary for the universe to exist as opposed to not existing. And then there was two other things. And so anyway, I can share that with you.
Yeah.
But I do want to move on. And
well, what if we're in an antimatter universe? What if all the things? I mean, because early days of the universe, there was a tremendous amount of antimatter and matter, and for some reason, there was more matter than antimatter. Why was that? Maybe we're living in an antimatter universe.
I just saw an article that. So one possibility is that an entire galaxy out there is antimatter, and if it collides with us, then boom, we're both gonna, matter and antimatter. For those who don't know, they explode in a really violent way, and we can create antimatter, so we know it exists. It's not like some fairy tale. It's a very real thing. We create it, and it tends to last very short periods of time on the particle accelerators. And it almost immediately annihilates. And we are creating it for longer and longer periods. And one study that I saw was finding a fundamental difference in neutrons, suggesting that a neutron is more, there's a slight difference in a neutron if you create it in a particle versus an antiparticle, and that might describe the difference. Like, I can't remember if it was a difference in mass or what, but basically there's something where, like, let's say equal amounts were created, but the ability of matter to annihilate antimatter, it's like one team has a slight edge, but even a slight edge with enough particles, you'll create matter over antimatter. But of course, this is just a hypothesis, very new. I think this article came out just a few weeks ago. But yeah, that's certainly one of the big questions: is why do we have a universe with matter and not antimatter?
I mean, I suppose it's just what we would always call it matter rather than antimatter.
Yeah. I mean, we've defined antimatter.
Yeah, the opposite of what we currently have.
Yeah. And, if the multiverse theory is true, then maybe there's an antimatter universe out there. And for whatever reason, we're just living in a universe that favored matter.
Right.
And people were doing studies in the antimatter universe, and they're like, oh my god, antimatter won because they're calling our world antimatter,
right,
and they're calling their world matter. Adam, I'm super grateful for your time today. One reason I wanted to talk to you is I feel like you're living a lot of people's personal dream. Like, you're out here in a beach community, you're at the prime of your life, you can play beach volleyball whenever you want. I don't know what other hobbies you have, but you're living a lot of people's dreams. And you're also keeping intellectually stimulated by working on AI solutions or deep learning or machine learning, whatever buzzword you want to use. So you're working on these projects. This brings me to a kind of a more fun and simple question, which is, what wastes the most time in your day?
Ooh, what wastes the most time?
In your day-to-day life?
Yeah. I suppose it depends on how you define wastes.
It's your question. It's your question.
Well, I have a pretty regimented day. Most days, all work days besides the weekends, are pretty much always the same. I wake up around 6:30ish. I have breakfast, and then I start working roughly around 7. And sometimes I'll go for a surf in the mid-morning. So some might see that as time wasted, but I don't see that as time wasted.
I don't know anyone who would say that.
Well, for a potential boss might consider that as time wasted. Then I'll come back and work some more, and I'll have lunch, and I'll normally listen to a podcast while I'm having lunch, and I'll read a little bit, then I'll have a nap, but a very short nap. And then I'll go back to work, and sometimes in the mid-afternoon I'll play volleyball, and then come back and shower, normally make some dinner. I used to watch a lot of sports. That would probably be my biggest time-wasting thing that wastes the most amount of my time. But now, all the sports are canceled.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and Steve Jobs, he was insistent that sports were just a complete waste of time.
Yeah, a lot of people think that.
And Ryan McGuire, a friend of ours here who plays volleyball, he likes the transition away from a bunch of people collecting and watching sports to more and more people just playing the sports. And I know as a kid, I loved baseball, for example, and I played it. And I couldn't watch a baseball game for the life of me. I think collectively I watched probably 3 baseball games my whole life, if you summed them all up, right? Because to me it was, 2.5 hours of guys scratching their crotch.
Like 3.5 hours.
Yeah, it was so unstimulating. And I'd watch a little bit, and when the World Series got intense and you didn't know the outcome, like, I could be really engaged temporarily then.
Yeah.
But it took a lot of, tension for me to be interested in watching sports, whereas playing them I love. And so I think I fit Ryan McGuire's idea of, hey, it's better if people are actually going and playing volleyball as opposed to watching the pros play.
Yeah. I don't think it's either better nor worse. Sports are my soap operas, I don't really like to watch a ton of other TV, but sports are so great because it's engaging enough to see these feats of athleticism and competitiveness, but you don't necessarily have to know too much of the backstory to appreciate it. Although the backstory does help. ESPN does a very good job of casting heroes and villains and creating this whole narrative around these sort of an epic rise of a certain team or a certain player. It's very mythical sometimes.
Well, and I know people like that. That's actually something that drove me away from watching the Olympics. When I was a kid, the Olympics was like 2 weeks of, I'm so excited to be watching this, and I loved, different countries competing against each other. I loved, just so many concepts around the Olympics. And then more and more, it's about the backstory.
Mm-hmm.
So they're, instead of being able to watch the sporting events themselves, they're trying to get you hooked on the backstory. And what I didn't like about that is, how can you not root for that guy, right, or that woman?
Mm-hmm.
It's impossible. right? So you end up rooting for that person they just gave this backstory on, but it doesn't mean the person on the other side of the court or the other side of the whatever competition doesn't mean they don't have amazing backstory.
Yeah.
It just means you've seen this one person, so you're biased towards wanting them to succeed.
Right.
Especially because, to get the Olympics is generally a story of struggle. Like, it's very rare that someone's just born into everything they need to be an Olympic athlete. It's usually, overcoming lots of different barriers to get to that point. And so those stories, I think, are compelling to people, but it turned me off of the Olympics because it made me too biased, and I don't like to be that biased.
Yeah.
So I stopped watching the Olympics largely.
Yeah.
Because I think more and more if you watch coverage of the Olympics for, let's say, 2 hours, it seems like 45 minutes of that is devoted to backstory.
Oh yeah, I mean, just any sport in general is, there's so much time not devoted to the actual playing of the sport, but just talking about the playing of the sport.
Yeah.
Which is, it's remarkable that it can prop up such a large industry. Yeah, I hear you. It's a bit much. It's overdone, but I guess it draws people in.
Well, I'm a little bit jealous, I gotta say. I definitely waste time in my day, and it sounds to me like you're saying you have this regimented lifestyle where you're basically doing the things that you want to do, and the only answer you could give is that maybe you watched too much sports once upon a time, but you've moved now, and it doesn't sound like that's an issue anymore.
Oh, well, I mean, I would still love to watch sport. I love March Madness, and it's gone now.
Totally gone.
That's a bummer. I would be spending lots of time watching college basketball right now.
Okay.
But I don't necessarily consider that time wasted, because I think once I'm done with my work day, that's my time. I get to use it however I decide. So to me, it's, I love college basketball. I love, even though it's terribly difficult for me to watch my team.
Which team is yours?
It's very stressful for me. The University of Virginia.
Oh, that's right.
So they had a wonderful year last year, and now we get to be the defending national champions for 2 years in a row. Yeah, which is great, but it's hard on my heart watching them, because I'm too emotionally invested.
Yeah, I had a guy on my team in the work world, and he was really committed to watching the San Francisco Giants. And the Giants, in that era, I think they won like 3 World Series within a 5 or 6 year span. I mean, something remarkable. And I don't think they'd ever even won a World Series. And then suddenly they won 3 in a short period. And he was recognizing that his day was going well on days that they won and poorly on days that they didn't win. And he was recognizing how codependent he had attached his lifestyle to the outcome of a professional sporting team.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. I feel the same way. When UVA basketball has a big win, I am just sort of euphoric for the next 24 hours.
But then there's the dark side.
Yeah, then I'm despondent if they get upset by a 16 seed, for example. That was a difficult weekend for me 2 years ago.
Well, it's a good thing. It's a good thing you're not a Cleveland Browns fan.
That's true. The
Cavaliers, you'd have been okay, but the Browns, it's been rough, man.
I do feel for those fans. "20 seconds is a really long time to wash your hands for."
Oh, did you 20-second it?
No.
Okay.
Not that time. But sometimes I think about it and it's a long time. I don't think many people normally wash their hands for 20 seconds.
No, doctors, but that's not it.
Yeah. Do they stick to the 20-second rule?
Yeah. I don't know. They have a technique, and they have to do this whole thing. And a lot of doctors talk about it just becomes subconscious.
Right.
And so they do it even when they're at home, even though it's not necessary anymore. But
Right.
they have to come up their arms.
Yeah.
And it's like a whole technique. I'm sure they learn in medical school.
Yeah.
All right, I got a fun question for you.
Okay.
What waste? No, that's the last question. Sorry.
Oh.
What personality trait has gotten you into the most trouble?
Let's see. Oh, there's so many that are.
You can pick 5.
I'm way too competitive. That certainly has caused issues. I have the terribly annoying habit of always playing devil's advocate and always disagreeing. It's sometimes it's very embarrassing. Oftentimes it's very embarrassing because I'll just disagree out of principle, just to see what the other side looks like, and normally the other side is not as well defended as the side of the person I'm talking to. So I lose a lot of arguments.
It's defensible.
Yeah, I'm very argumentative, but I lose a lot of arguments.
Hey, Socrates was the devil's advocate, right?
I suppose.
I think one of the things that probably annoyed the shit out of people, I think one of the things that Socrates, at least from my understanding, was famous for was just constantly disproving whatever people believed. And he did it doing something called the Socratic method, which wasn't quite perfect logic. He had a couple of steps, and I remember this in college where I was like, oh, that's not right.
Yeah.
But he would basically take whatever belief you had, and then he would convince you that your belief was not true. And I think he did that through something called the Socratic method.
Right.
But yeah, I imagine that wasn't very fun for people.
And he also had the benefit of creating his own, in a lot of his writings at least, he had the benefit of creating his, writing the side of the people who he was discussing with.
Yeah.
So he could sort of make them
Well, I just picture in
be
real
in
life.
total control over both sides of the argument.
I just picture a couple senators sitting around and like, oh god, here comes Socrates.
Yeah.
Oh god, it doesn't matter what we say,
Yeah.
he's gonna find some alternative argument.
Yeah, you're right. He must have been incredibly annoying to just about everyone around him.
Yeah, a lot of people anyway.
Right.
I'm sure he didn't have a lot of fan. Like,
Right.
there were people that were probably annoyed with him
Yeah.
based on that.
Yeah. Well, it's the same with me. There's a lot of people who were very annoyed talking to me.
Well, for what it's worth, I appreciate that quality of you, and I am aware of it. I am aware that, Adam often will just disagree,
Yeah.
and I don't think it's that he believes that.
No, I don't.
I just think that's something about him that, apparently your genetics, these controls.
Most certainly part of my genetics. But yeah, it's an embarrassing trait. But a lot of times I don't recognize it until I'm midway through an argument and I'm already invested by that point.
Yeah. I personally love it because I like discourse, trying to get to the bottom of things, and sometimes if I think someone's presenting devil's advocate, it provides that discourse. It's one mechanism that provides that discourse. And I've met people who I think are just obstinate, or maybe a better way to say it is obtuse devil's advocates, and I have no interest in talking to someone who's obtuse.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you can't have a discourse with me, then I don't have interest in a devil's advocate. But the reason I appreciate it about you is I feel like you're not being a devil's advocate just to prove someone wrong. I think there's intellectual curiosity there, and so I'm just throwing this out, this might not be true for you, but this is kind of my impression, is that by having that devil's advocate and along with someone who can articulate things, you're having a discourse that ideally will, maybe if you're lucky, get you to some better perspective.
Yeah, I think it certainly helps me to think, because I'm not a particularly systematic thinker on my own. I sort of, am struck with an idea and, of different types, and I don't necessarily take the time to think about an idea from all different sides and think it through all different, So for me, the discourse is a good way, even though I'm often on the wrong side of these discourses, it's a good way for me to sort of formulate thoughts on certain topics.
I'll be honest, I like being on the wrong side. Not because I want to forward a kind of a poor way of thinking or a poor perspective, poor idea, but because I love to learn new perspectives. I remember as a kid, I would speak to some of my friends, and they were like, my beliefs define me, and I'll never change my beliefs. And I couldn't be wired any differently. I feel like I am going to rewire my beliefs every opportunity I get. And I love it when I have something happen in life where I get to rewire my beliefs. Because I don't think beliefs are static. I love the idea of like, that belief system served me okay, but this new belief system is going to serve me so much more effectively or better or whatever. I love getting to a point where I'm like, if you were devil's advocate with me, the best outcome I can imagine is, oh my God, Adam's got some really good points here. And I feel like I thrive on that, or I'm, that kind of feeds me as a human, is to get to points where I can kind of dump these illusions that I had and see something that's better. And it doesn't mean that's the best. It means just, oh, it's better than what I had, and continually modifying that. So I don't ever want to feel like, oh, I've got this belief system that's all perfect and totally defensible. Better than that, I like to talk to people and find out different ways of thinking about things.
Yeah. I wish I don't think I'm quite as open-minded as you are. I would like to be, but
You don't like being wrong?
I don't like being wrong.
I love it.
But I find myself wrong so often that it's probably a good lesson in humility if I will ever learn humility. It'll be good. It'd be nice to continue these lessons. Force me to learn some humility.
Well, for me, it's not about humility. It really is. Just to me, it's like a discovery and just getting better at something, right? Like sports. Take sports for example. Like I don't want to think I'm good at any sports because that's one thing I love about professionals is you realize, okay, there's a big difference between me and this professional. And some of it's athletics, right? Like maybe some is just this body I am is never going to be capable of that. But instead of thinking that way, it's like, well, it's probably the majority is this like training your mind to work with your muscles in a very specific way, technique, strategy, all these other things. And so for me, one of the things that I value about sports is finding new and better ways to go about them. So kind of bringing it back to just a life lesson, if you're having a belief system, it's like your athletic skill. And if your belief system, oftentimes our belief systems are holding us back from something. Mm-hmm. And by finding a new way or a new belief system, it's like it unlocks a higher level of living. Just like in athletics, everything you learn unlocks like a slightly better way to perform in that sport.
Right.
So I kind of look at it like that, where in a sport, when I find a better way to do something, I'm super psyched about it. Instead of being like, oh, I wish my way was the better way, and I'm humble now to realize my way sucked. It's not about humility. It's more about like, heck yeah, I can do this better now.
Yeah, I mean that's a good mindset. I still hate to lose playing volleyball. I mean, I wish I didn't take it so seriously, and I wish I could be a little bit more just like, I learned something new. It was great. Got my ass whooped, but I still hate when I lose.
I'm going to challenge you on this.
Yeah?
Yeah. So I think that's a blanket statement, and I'm guessing.
I've always hated losing.
So here's where I'm going to challenge you on it. So I get really competitive too. I think I rival you in competitiveness. And there's a time and a place for it, right? Like if I'm playing with someone and I think that as a team we should be beating the other team, and I think just objectively we're better players, then I get really upset, right, or frustrated. And I try to respond to that frustration well. So just because I'm frustrated doesn't mean I try to play like crap or throw a tantrum. Mm-hmm. It just means I acknowledge that in my body I'm feeling feelings that I call frustration. It doesn't mean I'm acting out or yelling at someone or what. It just means, okay, I'm feeling frustrated. But if I was playing like Taylor Crabb and Jake Gibb, and you were my partner, and they were slaughtering us, I'd have a smile on my face.
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest, because I'd be like, these guys are amazing.
Yeah.
And I'd be hopefully learning something from them. And I don't think I'd be frustrated in the slightest, because I'd recognize I'm probably going to play the worst game of my life, and it has nothing to do with me, and everything to do with these guys are so talented that they're doing all these myriad little things that make me perform more poorly. So those are kind of extreme examples, but I think, I'm guessing you can relate that your frustration level probably amplifies with your like thoughts that, oh, we should be doing better than we're doing.
Definitely ties into expectations for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, without a doubt. If I expect to be winning a game and I'm losing it, I'm much more upset than if I'm expecting to get whooped and I'm still getting whooped. That's like anything. Oftentimes I find that my performance is inversely related to my expectations. You know, whenever I'm feeling like, oh, you know, I've been playing pretty well lately. I think today is going to be a really good day.
Yeah.
Inevitably, I am terrible.
Yeah.
And then the throwaway days where I'm just like, somebody calls me up last minute, oh, we need a fourth, please. You know, I go out there with no expectations and I play great.
Yeah, I've had days where when I'm driving, I'm feeling embarrassed before I get there because I'm aware that I'm the worst player that's going to show up and that I'm probably going to have like all losses and that basically everyone's only going to have wins when they're not with me. And sometimes on those days I have all wins.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't know how that happened. I feel amazing. I'm like, oh my God. And then there's other days where, you know, you have a high expectations and then you're like, wow, I got my ass kicked. I played with Mateo the other day, who's insanely good, and I lost with him. Obviously, it's my fault, right? And I was so bummed because I was like, I gotta play with Mateo. I'm so excited. And he was playing amazing.
Yeah.
I was just, you know, making too many mistakes.
Well, a lot of times it's the pressure, you know.
Totally.
Playing with a really great player, you like, oh man, I gotta perform. I gotta play their, you know, I gotta perform for them.
Level.
Yeah, and then you know, you don't play very well.
You're definitely not playing loose.
Right.
When you're like wanting to perform exceptionally well.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Well, the takeaway from this is if you're Taylor Crabb or is it Jake Gibb, if you're one of those guys and you want to play me and Adam,
yes,
we're ready.
Yeah, we're ready.
We'll learn.
Teach us whatever you want.
So you said there were so many. Were there any other personality traits that get you into trouble?
Oh.
You said competitive, and you said devil's advocate, kind of automatic devil's advocate.
Yes. Let's see. Oh gosh. Yes. Let's see. What are some other times I've been in trouble? Let's see. I've made lots of bad decisions, but that's not necessarily any character flaw of my own. It's just youth.
Yeah. This isn't the bad decisions. It's more personality traits.
Yeah.
Character traits.
Yeah. Those are the two. Those are
okay.
Two big. I mean, there's certainly more. We can save those for another day.
Well, I'll shore it up. You know, just to be mindful of time, we'll ask two more questions.
Okay.
The first one is going back to the TED Talk, and the other way I was going to phrase it.
Yeah.
You're like, ugh.
That was a shitty TED Talk I gave earlier.
I thought it sparked really interesting stuff.
Humility is fucking lame.
I thought it was a great TED Talk. It's this idea, if I'm getting this right, is that civilizations are cyclical. You know, to think that we're at the pinnacle of civilization and that it's only going to get better. So maybe that's not the pinnacle, right? The pinnacle's the peak, but we're steadily, linearly getting better, and we're just going to keep getting better. And you're like, well, no, it's more that these civilizations have risen and fallen. And like Game of Thrones, I think of they kind of played to this with the Valyrian steel coming from this other civilization that was clearly more advanced than they were. And you were talking about the Greeks kind of being around and seeing these cities that were abandoned and were greater. And even the Aztecs. I didn't know this until this year, or last year, that the Aztecs came upon ruins, and that was Tenochtitlan. That existed before the Aztecs got there. They just were like, wow, this place is awesome. And we don't know anything about the civilization that came before them that built that amazing city. So that, you know, like you said, there's people who stumble upon civilizations that were clearly more advanced than they were, but they know nothing about them. Like, they didn't know anything about Tenochtitlan. The pyramids we still know very little about, and in some ways whoever built the pyramids is more advanced than us, possibly, depending on the pyramids usage. And you see
only if you believe the History Channel and the aliens.
Yeah, that's what I'm all about. Ancient aliens, baby.
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry, back to the TED Talk. What would be a TED Talk you'd want to give, assuming you could just magically become an expert in that field or on that topic? So you kind of stumbled around like maybe what you are an expert in, and you're like, I don't know if I'm qualified. But what if you could just be an expert on anything? What would you want to give a TED Talk on?
I could care less about the TED Talk part of it, but I would love to be more of an expert in physics.
Like particle physics?
More like sort of
Astrophysics?
origins of the universe, quantum physics. I mean, I would just love to be more educated in physics, but I wouldn't love it so much to actually go through the time and energy of, studying physics, because there's a lot of math involved there. And...
The math is quite simple.
Oh, really?
Yes. I will say, if you know linear algebra, which is pretty standard, if you're a math major, you learn linear algebra like either your sophomore or your junior year. If you know linear algebra, boom, quantum physics is super simple. A lot of people get scared of quantum physics. It sounds really intense, but it's really, you know how waves work, right? Like you wrote equations for waves in high school physics, most likely. And it would be simple stuff, like you send a wave through a slit, and that wave, once it hits that slit, it radiates outwards. And if you have two slits, they both radiate and they interfere with each other, and on a detector, in some spots they constructively interfere, so the waves are like bigger and they splash on the cliffside, if the cliffside is your detector. In other areas they destructively interfere, so it's like a trough. And we learned the math on those waves, and it just so happens that using waves is how we can make sense of the quantum world. And so it's not quite waves, we have to square the wave function. So we know all the math already, and we just square that, and it turns into a probability. So we know, oh, if we do this exact same experiment, 90% of the time this will happen, and 10% of the time this will happen. And every experiment we've done to date has followed this exactly. But that math is very simple. Like we learned it in high school, and yeah, there's some more sophistication as you go. But the math itself isn't particularly difficult. It's confusing.
So you're saying I should pursue an advanced degree. I shouldn't let the math turn me away from pursuing an advanced degree in physics.
I'm saying that, yeah, but I have this belief that everything is basically learnable.
Yeah.
And I minored in quantum physics for my PhD, so
I've never heard anybody minoring in quantum physics.
Well, we had to, because we were using magnetic resonance to study lithium-ion batteries, and so a lot of that was statistical quantum mechanics or statistical quantum physics, and so we had to take all the courses and study that. And when you're doing your PhD work, just because I was in the chemical engineering department, but my professor came from the chemistry world, but then we were doing mostly quantum physics, so what's your PhD in at that point? And I feel like it was mostly in quantum physics, but I got it from a chemical engineering department, so it's with plenty of chemical engineering and chemistry involved.
Mm-hmm.
So then really what is it? And then you do pick up minors if you want, based on what courses you take.
Right.
Yeah, I'll show you the double slip experiment after this if you're interested. It's pretty cool. So then last question. This is one of my favorite questions. What is an important truth almost no one agrees with you on? That humans are awesome.
Yeah. I
get the impression you're not too psyched about humans.
Oh,
I love being a human. I feel very fortunate.
Yeah, no, I totally. I don't mean to badmouth
grateful.
my species. I'm not a traitor to the species. Let's see. Well, okay, the consciousness thing is one potentially. I don't really feel like I have any like wisdom that other people don't appreciate. I feel like that's what that would be. Is what?
I've got a whole list of these
What
things.
little piece of wisdom do you have?
I got a whole list of things that I think are true that
Yeah.
people don't agree with me on.
Yeah. That I think are true. What's a crazy thing that I think is true?
Doesn't have to be crazy. Like what's an important truth that most people disagree with you on? And some people can agree with you.
Mm.
You think ancient aliens didn't exist, so I already know you're a crackpot. This guy's clearly helping us with that.
Let's see, an important truth.
It's funny that's saved the History Channel, by the way.
Yeah.
Ancient aliens,
Right.
which has nothing to do with history, is totally like that's History Channel these days.
Yeah.
Used to be all about the Nazis. Now
Right.
History Channel is all about ancient aliens.
Right. I wonder where they get their funding from. I guess it's all just commercials. I guess that's why. It takes a lot of time and energy to research history, in a true in-depth way. And there's a limited population of people who are truly interested in that. Whereas Ancient Aliens, that commercial, like you draw in a whole wide swath of people.
Yeah, they're kind of misleading. Like what I do when I watch it, I'm like, oh my god, and then I'll go fact check and be like, oh come on, these guys they're leaving out some important details.
Right.
But when you watch it, like they're definitely convincing you.
Right.
Of a lot of things.
It goes to it's very easy to make something seem very compelling. If you don't know all the facts. Give me you start me off here. Give me something that you a truth, an important truth that you believe that I would disagree with you. Have you ever read The Elegant Universe, Brian Greene?
The Elegant Universe. Sounds like something I'd love to read.
It's fantastic. For a layman, it's a good explanation of quantum physics and a lot of components of quantum physics, at least.
Oh, okay.
And it's really I love thinking about the recursive nature of the universe. Our universe could really just be a black hole. The edges of the universe are really just the event horizon. There could be a bunch of different little bubbly universe amoebae, organisms, cells, and you can also go downwards in that the same properties that describe a black hole, its mass and spin and something else, are the exact same properties that describe an electron. So you could think of a black hole as just a large electron, or an electron is a very small black hole, and so it just goes. You go. Yeah, it's just so wonderful to think about all the different levels. And
so one of the videos I want to do in the future, and I haven't made this yet, but hopefully in the future, is comparing our solar system to an atom and our galaxy to a collection of atoms.
Mm-hmm.
And it's pretty remarkable how similar. So like
it's just turned off.
Yes, I think the battery's dead.
Change the battery. Exactly.
Okay, it's all about you, Adam.
Oh, okay.
So
I should have done some makeup. Stacy did cut my hair yesterday, so
nice.
This is as clean as I'm looking. Could have shaved a little bit, but
So we were talking earlier about the solar system. All the mass is the sun, and people don't realize like how massive the sun is. Like pretty much all the mass in our solar system is there, and the planets are just tiny compared to the sun. And not just tiny, they're super far away.
Mm-hmm.
So basically our solar system is almost all empty space.
Right.
And then if you think about the empty space between solar systems, I mean the distances between stars is so phenomenally large. But then when you go to the atomic scale, it's even more so.
Right.
Meaning the nucleus has even more of the mass in it than the rest of the atom. And then the distance between the electron and the nucleus is even larger than like our planets. Like it's much further out. And then I haven't done this calculation yet, but my suspicion is the distance between atoms, even in a very dense material, it relatively it dwarfs the distance between stars.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's remarkable that we fill a solid surface here, because this is all empty space. I mean, there's very little solid matter here.
Right.
And it's so finely concentrated. It's just remarkable, right? Like how we perceive the matter.
Right.
It's like almost all empty space.
Yeah, it is pretty. It's crazy to think about.
And so when you say the recursive nature, I was stuck in a time loop, but what you mean is a size loop.
Right.
Like our smallest thing might be someone else's biggest thing, and our biggest thing might be someone else's smallest thing, and it might just keep going.
Right. Our universe could just be a single electron in something else,
Yeah, they might think of our universe as a fundamental particle that's indivisible.
Right.
And yet we've got all this division within our universe.
Right.
Well, here's some primers for you. So here's things that I think are true that I don't know if people agree with me on. I think our most valuable asset as humans is our attention. And it's interesting to me because I think a lot of people give their attention away so freely, but I think it's our most valuable asset because I think we create our own world based on what our attention's on. Another one is most people don't hear what you actually say. And I learned this because I started doing something called active listening. And there's a few steps to it, but the goal is to make sure someone feels heard. And the very first step of this is just articulating what you've heard. And what I found, when I challenge people, I'm like, oh my gosh, they're not hearing what I'm saying. Yeah, what I found is people, they're hearing their own stories, their own narratives. If you post a comment on social media now, damn, people make all these assumptions about you that just aren't true. And it's like, where are you getting this from? Anyway, I think people hear what's going on in their world much more than what you're saying.
Yeah.
Another one.
Yeah.
I think personal assistants, digital personal assistants, are going to be the most intimate companions we have in the future. I'm not saying this is a good thing, but I think it's a reality. And I'm basing this on how people's phones are becoming their closest companion. They're interacting with their phone more than any other thing in the world. And I think it's just a matter of time before there's an AI or many AI components that are starting to interact with them. And so then that personal assistant or set of personal assistants is going to become their main interaction in life.
Well, it's certainly going to be the only consciousness that understands you, that you think that understands you. I mean, because that's just, it's easy enough to, just like the same feedback loops that happen in social media. I mean, you respond positively to when you hear things you want to hear. So it's, this little thing that's always going to be telling you what you want to hear. It's going to be your best friend. Yeah. I totally agree. Yes, Adam, you are so smart.
Oh, thank you.
God, thank you. You understand me.
Goons don't hear me even. Get me.
Yeah.
So with that primer, is there something that pops in mind?
Shit, something that I think is
an important truth people don't agree with you on.
Oh man.
Although you shot me down, it sounds like you agreed with my...
The two of them. The attention one is interesting. I'd have to think more about it.
The poor viewer into this video. The bad sound and then these other commotions. Sorry in advance. Sorry. We'll wrap it up quick.
I don't think people are very important on the whole. Humanity.
I think that's one. Wouldn't agree with you on.
Yeah, I suppose. Maybe.
So can you articulate more behind that? And I think you were already getting into this a little bit with the Elon Musk comment.
Yeah, right.
You were just like, I don't think it's that important that humans move on to other planets.
Yeah.
And that we preserve humans.
Well, I guess it's a little nihilistic though. I guess I'm just thinking about the broad scales. Thinking about the universe, for instance.
Well, what about
the scale of time of the universe? How insignificant we are. How insignificant everything on this planet is. Like, humans don't matter. We don't matter at all. We're tiny little useless creatures running around thinking we're so important. I mean, in one sense, it's very depressing because obviously we don't matter.
Isn't that nihilism?
Yeah.
None of this matters.
Yeah. Well, that's right.
That's a definition of nihilism.
Yeah.
I actually don't know. I'm asking.
I don't know the definition, but I mean, I do. Think that it is a very nihilistic thought for sure.
Nihilism, I think, is just the idea that none of it matters.
Yeah.
The rejection of all religious and moral principles in the belief that life is meaningless.
I don't think life is meaningless.
Oh.
I mean, you create your own meaning. Your life can mean whatever you want your life to mean, but it doesn't mean that it's important.
Jim Carrey went through a phase and might still be in this phase where he's like, nothing's important.
Yeah.
But I think he also said people latch on to this idea of meaning, and he's like, it's all meaningless.
Yeah. So he was a nihilist. Or he is a nihilist. He's not dead. He's still alive.
Yeah, he's still alive. But it might have been a phase. I mean, a lot of people thought he was going crazy, whereas I thought he was saying really intelligent things.
Yeah. He's just having an existential crisis.
Or was just thinking about heady stuff and getting into these ideas, and hey, maybe it doesn't matter. Because I struggle based on this idea that, you know, how insignificant are we? There's two ideas I have in my head. One is, do I want to leave a legacy of some sort? And two is, do I want to have a child or children? And when you get back to, well, none of this matters, none of this is important, then the answer to both of those is like, well, I mean, I should do it if I want to, but it doesn't matter. Like in the big scheme of things, even if I left the most impactful legacy possible, if it's true that, you know, we're just going to die out and it's not going to matter eventually, then, you know, that legacy will, what's the term, ripple through time for a while, but eventually it'll just fade into nothing. Mm-hmm. So it's like, well, you know, do it if you want.
Right.
But you know, that's the point.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, what's the point?
All right.
There really isn't one. But there is one I mean, it's all a question of scales, you know?
What about...
To an ant, you know, well, that's not a very good start, but, you know, obviously things matter on different scales. On the human scale, there's a lot of things that matter. This conversation has importance on the human scale, but you know, if you zoom out a little bit, obviously there's zero importance whatsoever. There's no importance to, you know, human civilization if you zoom out to a, you know, great enough scale. So it's sort of a cop out. It's all bullshit. Don't believe anything I say.
Here's one. Let's take away from humans, or let's take the humans out of the equation. So one idea is, if we wanted to travel to another solar system or another galaxy even, then we would need to create machines that could self-replicate. It's the only way around it, because no matter what machinery you have, it's going to eventually stop working. So you would need machinery that could somehow self-replicate, or machinery that could, you know, live forever. But a lot of people thought if we realistically want to leave this solar system, we would need to do it with something that could self-replicate, like something that could build more of itself and adapt to. And so in some ways, people think, well, DNA is exactly this thing that can self-replicate and mutate at the same time. So some people, ancient aliens, you watch a little bit of that, and a lot of the concept comes that it's possible that DNA did not originate on Earth. It's possible that DNA is ubiquitous, or at least ubiquitous enough in our close stellar surroundings that you know, it's come from comets and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So let's take that into another direction and just say that the only DNA we know of is on Earth, and it's nowhere else in our solar system. So let's extend that and say, well, we don't think it's anywhere else. Do you think there's value in getting DNA out of this solar system or onto other planets? So nothing about humans, DNA, or in other terms, life, as we think of life.
No.
So you don't think, okay.
The fundamental thing that I don't believe in is the uniqueness of life. I don't think we necessarily had a special, you know, we had like super special circumstances where all things, you know, all the stars aligned and like, you know, the lightning bolt hit the whatever and caused, you know, this chain reaction that led to formation of DNA and all this stuff. I think that sort of happens in a lot of places. Obviously, there's no evidence to support that belief that we have come across yet, which is interesting. That, you know, why, you know, obviously this Fermi's paradox. Why don't we have any evidence of intelligent life?
Yeah, and there's theories. There's several theories.
Right, because we all kill ourselves.
Well, and one of the theories is that there are such advanced civilizations, but we're basically ants that are not capable of processing that information.
Right.
You know, like ants next to a superhighway don't know that there's this advanced civilization with a superhighway right next to them. They're just, you know, doing their ant thing.
Right.
That's one of the many theories.
Yeah. Yeah, which is probably true. I mean, in all likelihood, You know, probably several of the theories are probably correct. You know, that's highly, to me that seems likely. Also, that a lot of them self-detonate with greater technology.
Just to add on to that, you would need a civilization to be at a point where it can send off radio frequency, or whatever frequency that we could interpret as this is coming from alien life. That would have to be in existence exactly the time it takes light to travel from there. So what are the odds that that happens? Because we've only been able to look at radio frequency for several decades.
Right.
So that time window, if you look to another star that's 100,000 light years away, you would have had to have a civilization that hasn't imploded yet, that was peaking enough or advanced enough to send us a radio signal 100,000 years ago.
Right.
To receive it right now with enough power to get
right, because it's likely that time span between the point when they had the power, they had the technological capabilities to send out radio waves, and the time when they kill themselves might be sort of short.
Yeah.
in the broad span. Shoot, what were we talking about before? I lost the track of our original. Before the digression.
So I brought up this idea that, let's forget humans for a second and wonder, is it worth getting DNA off Earth?
Yeah, right.
Spreading DNA to seeding the galaxy with DNA, basically, or at least starting with the solar system, seeding our solar system with DNA. And we're actively preventing this, by the way. So ethically, we've decided as humans, let's try not to. So when we send spaceships out, we do a lot of work, and I'm sure there's no way we're completely capable of doing this fully, but we spend a lot of work trying to remove all the DNA from aircraft or spacecraft that are going to land on Mars, for example. So anything that's landing on other planets has been decontaminated to the best of our ability. And I think even Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, they weren't even planned to land. I think we decontaminated them to the best of our ability because we made the ethical decision to not spread DNA.
I think that was a very nice decision to make.
So you agree with that decision?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think we're an invasive species.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. We are definitely an invasive species by our own definition.
Yeah.
Right? A definition is something that grows uncontrollably and takes out native species.
Right. Yeah.
Well, shoot. Adam, thanks for your time today. Adam, I guess I can't look at my camera anymore because it's not on, but Adam lost a bet. He thought coronavirus was not a more deadly than the common flu from a percentage perspective.
Right.
So far, the flu has been far more deadly than coronavirus from absolute numbers, but it is more deadly from a percentage, and hopefully it's not going to continue to be the case. But thank you for your time. I'm glad you lost that bet.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I lose all sorts of bets. Like I've said, you start arguing with me, I'll probably lose it. So.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Adam.
My pleasure. Thank you.